I'm doing great. How about you? Dude, I'm doing really, really good.
I'm glad you.
Really good. That's really, really great thing.
Hey everyone, it's Mr. Sud coming from fourth period live. I'm gonna go through the AP Classroom Unit 3 Progress Check FRQ. Let's get started. Okay, so for the Progress Check FRQ, we're dealing with I can't remember. Yeah, this is the one with conditionals. So here's the context. We're gonna go ahead and write code that's going to allow us to determine whether or not someone has RSVP'd yes or no. And then more importantly, if they RSVP'd yes, then are they doing beef, chicken, pasta, or otherwise it's just going to be fish. I presume that pasta means it's a vegetarian option. So basically there's an option 1 and option 2, and that'll come into play in part C, I think it was, part D, one of the last ones. D it is. So let's go with A. A is kind of the easy one to kind of warm up, which is very nice of our friends at the College Board. We basically need to write a code segment, and let me zoom in a little bit just so you can see my bad handwriting. It's going to print attending. So again, that's the P word we need to focus on. If the RSVP is true. And it would print not attending otherwise. So again, if remember code or not code we're not doing code.org anymore, but College Board is very deliberate with what they write. So they want us to do a print. So if I can give this a thought bubble, I'm thinking we're going to use the system.out.println. I guess you don't need the new line, but I'm going to use something like that, right? I'm probably going to use some sort of if statement, right? And then otherwise, if they're not attending, then I could probably just roll right into an else. So that's kind of my little thought bubble in all of this. Okay, so now let's actually get to the actual code. So this one's pretty straightforward. We're going to start with an if statement. And it's going to say if RSVP is true. So there's a couple ways to do this, but the easiest one is just to be like, hey, it's if RSVP. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, RSVP, wait, don't you need the double equals true? And the answer is you don't need it. Why? Because RSVP, as it says above, is a Boolean variable. So if what's inside the parentheses is already true, then the following code will execute, which is, and I'll try and write legibly, the system.out.print, or ln, I don't care. And it's supposed to say attending, right? Don't forget your quotations, because it is going to be a string. Or it's text, I should say. And then otherwise, we could just go straight to else, right? Because that's the only other option, is that RSVP would just be false. And what's going to happen is we're just going to print out not attending. And that's kind of it. Again, it was just kind of a straightforward, like you're either going or not. I think the intent probably from the College Board is just to make sure, do you know how to write an if and an else statement given a Boolean variable type. Right. Okay, so then if we go to part B, now they want us to write the code. Oh yeah, this is based off the 3 selections. What I ended up doing, which you can't see, so basically now they want to know, hey, if you are going, right, assuming that you are going, we want to know, we want to have a way to associate a numerical value to the, was it beef, chicken, pasta, or fish selection. So what I did is on the side, I just wrote down my little notes because I didn't want to flip back and forth. And I knew that 1 was beef, 2 was chicken, 3 was pasta, and then everything else, I just put X is fishy. Let's kind of box it off to this side because it doesn't have anything to do with the code, obviously. But I need some sort of, if you'll have scratch paper too, so you can write on that if you want. But what they're going to score is your actual code. I guess if you wanted to be safe, you could do the /*, right, to make it a comment technically, but again, if you call it notes and put it off to the side, they're not going to grade it. What they want to know though is basically, again, reading through the question just to make sure I identify it. We read a code segment, it's going to print, right? So in my head, I'm like, okay, system.out.print. The food item associated with selection. That's my variable, I think, that was created on the first page. If selection is 3, the code segment should print pasta. So it tells you right there. So write the code segment below. So this is just a series of ifs. Now, remember in part A, we used an if, and then it said, hey, if you're either attending or you're not. So it's easy to just go if and else. If gets executed, if it's true, otherwise it's just going to go straight to the else and assume that you're not attending. In this case, we can't just use an else because there are multiple criteria that need to be met, right? So the first thing we need to do is if that value of selection, and here we can use the double equal sign, right? Because it's a numerical value, 1. Then we need to, and this gets kind of redundant, but we just need to print the word, what is it, beef, for 1. So I wrote that down. Okay. So now remember, we're kind of in this structure of if, and we want to keep evaluating until we find a true statement. So then that's where we're going to use the else if to evaluate, if I can write correctly, if selection double equals 2, then now we're going to print chicken. Would it be faster to make it an array? Yes, but that is not the intent of the question. We will get to arrays in unit 6, which is coming up pretty soon. So then now we're going to print chicken. And then last, or not last, so we got 2 more, I think. Yeah, so then we got else if selection double equals 3. In this case, we're going to print pasta. And then I'm running out of room, but I'm going to write off to the side. Then the last thing we need to do though is we need to write. So once all of these 3 criteria are all false, then we need some sort of catch-all, which it tells you is if it's not a 1, 2, or 3, then it's going to be just fish. Which you can't see. The main thing they're going to be looking for here is that you know how to use the if, the else if for when the first condition is not true. So it keeps evaluating the else ifs. And then finally, if all 3 of those are false, then it catches with else. So if you use, maybe you can use an else if at the very end. No, you can't use an else if at the end because else if is going to evaluate some condition to be true or false. So the else is that last catch-all. So you need to use all 3 of these. Okay, part C. This one, I don't think, yeah, I kind of didn't leave enough room, so I apologize. They had a lot to write in here on the College Board. Okay, so this one, we're going to store a dinner selection in option 1. So that is an actual variable. If you remember on page 1, they had 2 variables, option 1, option 2 listed. So I'm just remembering that, hey, they were string, yeah? Yep, they were string variables. So I'm thinking about text being stored there based on the values of RSVP and selection. So again, these are 2 other variables that are true or that are going to be true or not true. Or sorry, RSVP is Boolean. Selection was an INT for 1, 2, 3 or nothing. And then so now what they want us to do is if the RSVP is true, the code segment should store in option 1 a string indicating person's attendance and food choice. For example, if RSVP is true, okay, so I'm going to kind of squeeze line that, and the selection is 1, the following string should be stored in option 1. There are a couple ways to do this that I can think of. The one, at least I don't like to use like the double ampersand. since I can't write it very well. So I just nested mine. I can look at the College Board in a minute to see what to just check if they had an alternate or whatever. But here's kind of what's going to happen. So if the RSVP is true and our attendee selects one, then I need to display this text. Thanks for attending. You will be served beef. If they're not going to be there, we obviously don't want to tell them, hey, thanks for attending, because they're not. And basically, we just say, sorry, you can't make it. Okay, so we have to evaluate criteria where RSVP is true and one where it's not. And again, they're trying to. I think what the College Board wants is they want us to show, or can you use essentially nested if statements without saying it, or some sort of logical operator like an and or an or if you want. So here's what I'm thinking I'm doing is the first thing I got to do is it leads off with if RSVP is true. So I'm going to go ahead and I kind of write big. So I wrote next to the text. So I wrote if, again, I did just RSVP. So assuming that's true, I know they're attending, but I don't know what their selection is, right? So then I need another if statement embedded, right? Where I'm going to evaluate like whether or not like that option is true or not. So there's a couple ways to do this. If we want, we can also let me look at the text real quick. You see us as thanks for attending, you will be served beef. So if we think about it, which part of this sentence is predicated on you attending? Well, it's this first part, right? So that's text I can preload. The only thing that's going to change, so if our RCP is true, this will print no matter what. This second criteria here is what's going to be based off of your selection of 1, 2, or 3, or some other number, right? That's going to be the beef, chicken, fish, pasta. So I can go ahead and print if I want. Oh wait, hold on. Am I missing something? Oh, I'm sorry. I missed one more thing. This is the tricky part. If the RCP is true, the code segment should store in option 1 a string indicating the person's attendance and food choice. Okay, so sorry, my bad. I can't just print. I have to just store it. Let me just check. Yeah, I never used the print, which is good on that. So I'm going to go ahead, once the RSVP is true, let's go ahead and preload that first part. And the order isn't as important, but the main thing they want us to do is in option 1, they want us to store that string. So remember, the variables that are already here have already been declared, and it is string for the data type. So I'm going to say, thanks for attending. And it says you will be served. And it's okay to spill over to the next line. And I'll put a space here and then semicolon. So now once RSVP is true, then this will happen. Now what I need to do though is I still need to figure out like what do we do for each selection, right? There's going to be selection 1, 2, 3, or 4. And again, there's different ways to do this one. So I'll check the College Board in a minute for what are all their alternate solutions, I'm sure, or how they did it too. But you could do a nested if statement right now if you want, or before you did option 1. You can also do it after. So I just, at this point, I said, hey, what if the selection is equal to double equals, right, to that value of 1, just like we did above? Well, then at that point, I need to remember we're not printing anything. We are merely storing it. Right. So I can take option 1 and I can go ahead and use what's already in option 1 plus, and that plus is for a concatenation. In this case, selection's 1, right? So it's going to be beef. I write it out, but I know some of you guys remember the plus equals. It does the same thing. So I can write that off to the side too. So alternatively, you could just write option 1 plus equals beef. So either way is fine. Again, the order of the if statements could be different. You have to start with RSVP first. That's the first criteria. But you could do an if selection double equals 1 right away. The only problem when you do that is you're going to write the words, thanks for attending, you will be served, right? Over and over and over 4 times. So this at least saves you a little bit of time. So what if it's not selection one, then I needed to evaluate with an else if, right? Because one of these is going to be true. Selection is equal to 2. In which case we're going to do the same thing, the option 1 plus option 1. Or I guess I could do plus equals, but same thing. In this case, selection number 2 is chicken. And we're going to do the same thing over and over. So it's a lot of repeat, which I know seems kind of redundant, and I apologize for not leaving enough room there. 3 is going to give me pasta. And then finally, if none of these are true, then I need kind of a catch-all, which is the else, right? And part of the reason you might think, well, can I just use one more else if? You could, but College Board is not dumb. They basically said, hey, if it's not 1, 2, or 3, then it needs to be fish. So maybe the premise is they give you 4 options, or somehow there's a way to select something beyond number 4, number 5. I don't know. So they just want to catch all. So then at that point, you would just make option 1 tack on with fish using the else statement. Again, I ran out of room, which sucks. So then the other thing I had to add at the end, I guess I'll just use a little a little arrow. Obviously, College Board will give you a lot more room to write. I was just trying to fit this in a few pages. And then the last catch-all is if RCP is false, it should say, sorry, you can't make it. And remember, pay attention. It says, regardless of the value of the selection, we need to store in option 1 that sorry, you can't make it. So I used an else. And then we're just going to set the value of option 1 equal to, like, sorry, you can't make it, or whatever is said. So that one's a little bit more annoying, not too difficult, but we just have to pay attention to so you can tell if you haven't from the multiple choice and this progress check FRQ, they're really trying to hammer you on, do you know the difference between an if, else if, and an else? Can you use them all to, in this case, just store values to an object? Or to a variable, sorry. So okay, last one for option D. This one, they just want us to write a code segment that will print. So in this case, there's that word print. True if strings option 1 and option 2 contain the same values, and will print otherwise. Okay. So here, they're not really testing. They're testing you kind of on the if statement, but more importantly, check this out. Whether they contain the same values. So what method shall we use there? We should use dot equals. That's our winner there. Do not use the double equal sign. We don't want to use that. That tells me, are those 2 objects stored in, are those 2 the same objects basically? The equals method will evaluate whether the values are the same or not. Okay, so write a code segment that will print true if the strings option 1, option 2 contain the same values. So there's my if statement, which is that variable option 1, right? And I have to use that object to call the equals method. Remember, the equals method exists in the object God tier class. So that's why you can use any object to call that method. So assuming this is true, then it'll print it's just going to print true. Okay, so then I would just go ahead and print true. And if that's not the case, we just need to print all false, right? Otherwise, it says. So that's a dead giveaway. We're going to use the else and then just print false. That is all, but you can't see.